It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time now, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day and welcome, listeners, to the Two Jacks. We're going all the way around the world. In fact, we're starting in Australia, where we always should start, and then we're going to go all around the world with all the latest news, and a bit of opinion comes into it, or courtesy of myself, of course, Jack the Insider, and the other Jack, Hong Kong Jack. How are you, mate?
Oh, cold here, mate, cold.
Well, the
winter monsoon's kicked on, and I've burnt all the palings off the back fence. I'm getting onto the uprights, and the bloke over the back he's muttering to me something about common property or something.
Could be a soft sit. Now, you'll be. How's the electricity bill? You won't be looking forward to that when it comes in. Yes, bit breezy too in the Southern Highlands, I must say. Looked at the temperature at about 7 o'clock last night. It was 10, and in that meteorological wave, felt like 6 apparently, with wind chills and what have you. We have not had much of a summer. Didn't have much of one last year, but starting to get ridiculous now. Now, look, Jack, we want to kick this off, as I say, with some local news, and the Administrative Affairs
Appeals Tribunal.
Administrative Appeals Tribunal is being shut down by the Albanese government, led by the Attorney General there, Mark Dreyfus. Tell me, what does it do?
I mean, it started, I think it was Sir Gerald Brennan was the first head of the AAT, the father of Father Frank Brennan, the distinguished lawyer.
Yes.
It's meant to review administrative decisions made by the executive branch of the government. And it can't review all of them, but it can review certain categories thereof.
It oversees pay for parliamentarians. Is that part of its?
No, that's the Remuneration Tribunal.
Yes.
I don't think that was subsumed into the AAT, although a lot of the other tribunals were. The Social Security Appeals Tribunal, the Veterans Review Board, and the tribunal on which I served for 10 years, the Refugee Review Tribunal, all became part of the AAT over the last 10 years or so.
And it's been loaded up. And of course, we might remember just prior to the election being announced, there was another, I think, 6 or 8 Liberal Party appointees headed that way. It's just been loaded up with partisan hacks, basically, hasn't it?
Well, there've always been people who are associated with the party in government appointed. That's certainly true. Just the numbers and the proportions have changed over the last 10 years. It's become a bit of a picnic.
This is the Morrison government. They appointed someone to the AAT who was ultimately had to be prohibited from making any handing down any judgments on matters relating to vaccines, because it transpired this person was, shall we say, to keep it nice and easy, an anti-vaxxer. I mean, that's the problem with a group like this, that if it becomes partisan, it ceases to do its performance oversight rule.
Yeah. It's always a bit hard to classify who's a political appointment and who's not. But just some researchers have had a crack at it, and they think that the percentage of political appointments went up from 6% under the Howard years to about 40% under the Turnbull and Morrison years. And leaving aside the fuzziness of determining who's a political appointment, that's becoming a bit of a picnic and a bit of a rort. I can say that I was appointed by a Labor minister, but in those days you generally only got 2 or 3 or 4 year appointments. But I was appointed there in 1994 and served on there till 2004. So clearly I was reappointed by Liberal governments as well. And that was pretty common. Although at the end of that time, as the numbers of cases were dropping away, the Liberal government did get rid of nearly all of the Labor appointments. and I was one of them. So
Yeah, so 40%, well, we're almost at half. 40% filled with people making judgments who certainly were friends of the Liberal Party, Jack.
yeah, and that's there's no problem with people who have got a political past being on the tribunal. And one of the things they're proposing is that it should all go to a merit-based appointment, and and part of that process is there's always key people in the legal professional bodies and in the bureaucracy who think they should decide who goes on courts and tribunals. And that's because they want a whole lot of people like them. And that's the wrong approach. You actually need people who are outside that process to come in and help the decision-making process.
So, well, let me just take you back. Why would a civilian go to the AAT, Jack? What would be the sort of trigger?
Most commonly, it's because they've applied for a protection visa and been knocked back. That's the biggest proportion of their work, and it's the source of most of their backlog. And that's something we can talk about another day as to how that's come apart. Yet another hole has been discovered in Australia's processing of refugee applicants, and that hole has been the numbers have been pouring through the gap in the hedge, shall we say, and there are huge numbers of people.
Is that just because of caseload?
Tens of thousands.
Is that just because of caseload?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what the Attorney General, Federal Attorney General, has said about the AAT. He says the AAT's public standing has been irreversibly damaged as a result of the actions of the former government over 9 years. He said the body had been fatally compromised by the coalition, and he went on to say this was a disgraceful exhibition of cronyism by the Liberal Party.
Well, I don't think it's been permanently damaged. I don't think it's been done any good, but he is making a political point because what he wants to do is burn it down and start again, and that's not a bad idea. I mean, a lot of these bodies, the federal court has been through a similar process where a lot of its work now goes to the Federal Magistrates Court. Because the family court itself was sort of becoming not quite fit for purpose.
Yeah, but it's raised all sorts of problems too, hasn't it? You know, and this is not on our list of things to discuss today. But where family law court determinations are not really very suitable for just about any party involved.
No,
I guess that's the
everyone
nature
walks
of that
away
problem.
unhappy. People have asked me, have you ever had any interest in practicing in the jurisdiction? And I've always said no, because everybody walks away unhappy. There's not much joy to be had in a life doing that. You know?
So where are we going to go with this, Jack? Where's the reform going to occur? There's going to be a new body. There must be a new body arise from it. And you've talked about the selection processes. Really what you want is people from all walks of life, aren't you?
Well, you want, not from all walks of life, but you need a bit of a variety of people. And to be honest, you can't always tell when you appoint people who's going to be any good at it and who's not. And that the same is true of the courts.
Yeah. Okay.
It looks like it. Some people, it looks like the job looks like it should suit them, and they get there and it doesn't. You know?
Right. So the decision to scrap the AAT apparently has been long considered. But I'm just wondering, and we're just going to, basically just sack all the. They have the status of stipendiary magistrates, don't they? Those people similar. Yeah. And is it just a matter of the easy way of just cleaning out the cronyism and then start again with a few more Labor cronies? Is that the way it's going to go?
With a better balance, perhaps. That's pretty much what's happening. And there also needs to be some tidying up in the administrative process of the tribunal itself. How do you better deal with backlogs? How you better organise your hearings, etc., etc. That always needs some periodic tidying up. So you do the two things together. You get rid of the current sort of overstacked membership. You tidy up the administrative arrangements, and you start again.
And overseeing that task, Jack, is a task force led by former High Court Judge Patrick Keane, and so it at least has the sounds of a hands-off government. Shadow Attorney General Julian Leeser has accused Labor of wanting to start a new body from scratch to stack with its own people, which is what I cynically suggested might be the case as well. But at least there is the appearance of an independent review.
Yeah, look, it needs to happen every now and again, and it will, and it's all okay.
It's big bucks, mate. You would remember this, wealthy man like yourself. You'd remember that, like the people who sit in hearings, they're on. From memory, it's definitely six figures, but in the threes, so sort of $300,000 a year type of salary.
It's gone up a bit since my day, mate, but I did enjoy the petrol card.
Free car, yeah, you can't go past the free car. Now we really want to have an expanded discussion today on the voice, and the Langton-Calma Report is out now, Jack. I could read through the executive summary and the recommendations, but they are really just sort of motherhood statements, aren't they?
I think the more people who read the Langton-Calma Report, the less chance there is the referendum will pass.
Well, it's just written in such a... Look, I've got a lot of time for Marcia Langton, really enormous amount of time for her contribution to Indigenous Australia through the fairly lofty areas of academia. But this really is, I mean, I did read the report, or at least the executive summary, which runs 3 or 4 pages, and really it's just not clear. I mean, at the end of it, I'll give our listeners an idea. This is some of the recommendations of the Australian government from the Langton-Calma Report. Progress an Indigenous voice by implementing the local and regional voices and national voice proposals as set out in the final report. That is the Langton-Calma Report. Recognise the importance of involving all levels of government in local and regional voices and seek to negotiate formal commitments as soon as practical. Recognise the importance of ensuring sustainability and security for an Indigenous voice. Recognise the need to continue in partnership to progress implementation, and recognise the need for a comprehensive communication strategy to support community understanding. Now, look, it goes on. There's a couple more recommendations there, Jack, but that's as clear as mud to me.
When I read the whole thing, and you think you're reading a report from a management consulting firm.
That's what it's read like to me too. Lots of buzzwords in there. Progress is a verb. Lots of stuff like that. And I came away just feeling a bit unsatisfied.
More importantly, I think, having read the whole thing, there are 2 problems with the voice that will need to be addressed, in my opinion. The first is that there is no plan to work out how the members of the membership of the voice will be selected or elected, and it's not clear which it would be.
Yep.
You're in the seat of MacArthur, aren't you?
No, Whitlam.
Whitlam, yeah. It's a bit like telling the good people of Whitlam, look, we'll leave you alone and you sort out who your local member should be. And that just can't work. And the second problem that I see, having read the Langton-Calma Report, is that, as envisaged, it is not just that the voice makes a recommendation to Parliament, but it also can insert itself into every level of the executive branch of the government.
Well, that's not clear from these recommendations.
No, it's not clear, but that's how it reads to me. And my view of that is both of them will become an absolute lawyer fest.
So when this report calls for local and regional voices and a national voice, so that's the first thing that caught my eye, that there was actually a structure, and now whether it's an elected body or
a selected body.
That works at a local level, then at a regional level, so we can take this as to mean local, state and federal. So the three tiers of government will have advisory groups, either elected or selected.
Worse than that, that's complicated. But worse than that, the way I read it is that each of those levels should be working with the executive branches of that level of government. So not just with the elected politicians, but working with the public servants.
Yes.
And that's an absolute lawyer fest, because then you're going to have every public servant who it'll be great work for the AAT, because every public servant who doesn't make the decision that the voice likes can go off to the AAT and say, you didn't give proper consideration to what
X, Y, and Z.
X, Y, and Z. And that's going to be fabulous for the legal profession, but for nobody else.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, Jack.
There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. Yeah.
No, look,
I might come back to Australia and hang out my shingle again. There's going to be plenty of work in that.
Let's get to this issue about election as opposed to selection. There are a couple of things that ring out to me that that I've got sort of skulls and crossbones over them. If there's going to be an election, and I think it's unfair to go back to the old ATSIC body and look at that as a parallel, but if there's going to be an election of officials who are going to report to the federal government, representatives who are going to report to in this sort of this body, extra parliamentary body, on legislation that impacts and government and policy more generally that impacts on Indigenous lives. Surely the Australian Electoral Commission must oversee that. And then we have to have, it's not just a matter of ticking a box, do we have a broad election, a more or less general election where everyone can vote, or do we have Indigenous Australians only voting on that group? If there is going to be an electorate, certainly I would think it's an absolute must that the Australian Electoral Commission must oversee it.
And then you would need a register of voters. And then it's a question of who gets to be on the register of voters.
That could mean anyone who's ticked the box on the Medicare form, mate.
Yeah.
And look, there is a definition of Aboriginality in Australia that's accepted, and that is basically a grandparent. And I've got no problem with that definition, but how an oversight electoral body like the AEC would oversee it, I just can't see how that body can be created. So I get to the point there that it won't be an election, Jack, it'll be a selection.
And then it's a question, whenever you have a selection, it's a selection by whom?
All right. Now, there are a few...
I came away after having read the Langton-Calma Report a little bit troubled by it and thinking that there's a lot more work to be done before this should be put to the people.
Yeah, I certainly got that view too. And can you please, when we're considering these things, can you please write them in a sort of coherent way?
leave the McKinsey chaps out of the
job. Yeah. Look, we do note former High Court Justice Ian Callanan has popped the typewriter away from his racy novels, Jack. Very, very racy they were in their time. And he's become a bit of a critic of that. He says it is always better to hear all of the arguments before deciding a case. That does make sense. In the recent past, at least, government has funded both an argument for and an argument against the case in a referendum for a change to the Constitution. That is apparently not to happen here. Rather, there is to be a public education program on the issue. The expression public education has an ominous Orwellian sound to me. I won't go on. So Ian Callanan is saying that I'm not quite sure what he's saying. The government has to put forward, it should put forward an argument for and against.
Well, he's a lawyer, so he would say that. That's how the law
And a
works.
racing novelist.
Yeah, and a racing novelist. But that's how it works. He did make two good points in the broader article. One is that as presently envisaged, it will be a lawyer fest, and I agree with that. And he makes the second point, which I also agree with. That's not a good idea because, in his view, despite having been a lawyer for a long time and served on the highest court of the land, he didn't come to the view that lawyers were the best people to decide this. Or as I put it, I don't believe the priestly caste of lawyers are the right people to be running the country.
Look, we talked about this from the outset, Jack, and the need to communicate with all Australians, and we're certainly not getting that from from the Voice at the moment. And it needs to be clear, and it needs to be concise, and it needs to be coherent. And so we will know. So this is what we need. If we're going to vote on, we can't vote on things that are in the nebula and then leave it to be sorted out afterwards. We need to consider constitutional recognition. We need to consider the makeup of the extra parliamentary body. As I understand it, those are basically the two. One thing can be done. The makeup of the extra parliamentary body can be created without the need for a referendum. The other one is we just need a form of words, that will. That we can basically use as a method to vote on.
My view of this is that there's going to be one chance now, and there won't be another chance now for 10 years. So it's got to be got right. And at the moment, I'm not confident. Minimum. I'm not confident they're on the right track.
10 minimum, and if you get it wrong, I mean, what do we say? What do we say to Indigenous Australia?
Yep.
You know. I mean, it is so important to get this thing right, and we really do need some better communication. We need some better communication from Linda Burney, and we need some better communication from the Indigenous leaders in the country as to what exactly is being proposed.
Yeah, well, I think they've got to sort out what's actually being proposed.
Yeah, there seems
at the
to
moment,
be some doubt.
That's not clear at all.
What do you reckon? Just push everyone else out of the road and let Noel Pearson talk? Sometimes I think that's the best way to go with Indigenous affairs. Anyway, no, it has to be done collaboratively.
Well, Noel Pearson is a bit of a bulldozer, isn't he, really?
Yeah, he doesn't mess around. Mess around.
He'd have made an excellent halfback flanker in a final series.
Oh, and give you a spray too. On while you're leaving the ground. Now, Jack, as I've always been suggesting, salads are incredibly dangerous. I tend to avoid them. But all jokes aside, 8 Victorians are ill after eating supermarket brand contaminated baby spinach, the worst of all salads, Jack. And it's containing an hallucinogen. And it makes me think that some people have been dining on the salads and perhaps may not know about it. Might have been a few at Melbourne watching the Melbourne Victory going around, Jack. They might have been on the salads over the weekend. We'll talk about them later.
Well, personally, I always think if you go to a steak frites joint, you eat the steak in the frites and you push the salad around the plate a little bit. You know,
you do. You get the cream spinach and you poke it with a fork, and then you just leave it for the waiter to take away when you're done.
I must say this has been happening in the US for quite some time. For the last 5 or 10 years, there are regular announcements of pre-washed salads that cause illness.
Yeah,
you know,
it's generally the wash rather than the salad that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah. So the problem is that the salads that cause the illness are the ones you buy in a bag or in a little plastic container that are supposed to be pre-washed. So you just tip them out of your bag into the salad bowl, dress them, put some tomatoes on them, and away you go. The trouble is the washing process. Is the people who are paid to wash this are not always working at their best.
Well, it might be too that the quality of the water that's used to wash them might not be entirely hunky-dory as well. We did have a major problem with a frozen fruits, berries,
Yeah, same problem, really.
and that was leading to hepatitis. So very profound and enduring problems for people who picked it up. And so I guess the answer is, if someone passes you the salad bowl at Christmas around the Christmas table, Jack, just knock it on the head. Say, I'm right, thanks. Just give me some more turkey.
Yeah,
That's been cooked at 350 degrees.
Yeah, my doctor advises against salads, and I think the lesson really is that if you're going to buy these pre-washed salads, tip them in the sink, give them a bit of a rinse yourself.
Yeah, and let them air dry. And look, it just tells us what would Popeye have done, Jack? He would have been on the baby spinach. Developed that incredible physique, but then he'd be tripping off his nuts.
I think he ate the full-grown spinach. In a can.
He got it out of the tin. That's how you got it. But the baby spinach, he'd just be off his face. So I do notice. I was down the supermarket Saturday, and a number of the plastic bags had been removed, and a few signs up, and what have you. And very busy day, actually.
We actually get quite a few of our bag salads here from the United States. So I've been following this story for years and learnt my lesson from that a while back. The stuff that doesn't come from the United States tends to come from the mainland. And I'm not sure you trust that anymore, would you, really?
No, possibly not. Yeah, okay. So stick with the meat and 2 veg this Christmas. Robo-Debt. Jack, I watched Scott Morrison give evidence at the Royal Commission.
I couldn't get that. I would have loved to have seen that.
Oh, my Lord. It was a reminder. It was a reminder if we needed. Gee, it's good to be rid of this bloke. It took him 20 minutes to clarify his initial answer, which was no. And proceeded to the chagrin of the Royal Commissioner, proceeded to basically, sort of anticipate questions and refer to notes that he wasn't supposed to have. And in the end, it was a long and drawn-out exercise over nothing. As I understand it, the problem is, not the problem, but the finger pointing is either going to the bureaucracy. It was a DHS or DSS. I can't remember which one. They were supposed to. They provided a report to the minister and the minister for DHS at the time that said that if we're going to go ahead with this robo-debt idea, then we will have to. The government will have to address it legislatively. It will require legislative change. Then they came back with a report about 3 months later with no mention of any requirement for legislative change. And that's given at least people like Scott Morrison and one or two others the ability to say, well, it was the bureaucracy what done it, Jack. Is that your reading on it?
Yeah, that seems to be what's happening. But it's the old story, isn't it, that a great idea has many parents, a bad idea is an orphan.
Yeah, this is a terrible idea. And the bureaucrats, to be fair, they've just gone, we thought it was going to be okay. And it's just awful. I mean, we can trivialise this as much as we like. It led to extraordinary levels of anxiety with people being hit. If you were a welfare recipient 5 or 6 years before hand, and all of a sudden you were getting a notice saying, basically on an analysis of your income through the ATO. So the DSS was accessing ATO, right? Yep. ATO and taxation findings, and taxation returns, and so forth. And then through that annual income was able to apply this on a weekly or fortnightly basis and then turn around and send out a letter saying, you owe us a lot of money. You owe us $6,000, $2,000, $1,500, that sort of thing. And for people in low incomes, obviously that created a great deal of anxiety. And we know where it's all ended. It ended with a $1.5 billion payout. and one of the most sort of shameful episodes of government overreach you could imagine.
Indeed.
And now apparently no one's to blame, Jack.
I love the statement from one of the public servants. The department was faithfully implementing, as it is our job to do that. Once it became apparent that these debts weren't validly raised, the program ceased, which was good.
So no harm done, except for many suicides, a great deal of grief, and targeted really at lower socioeconomic groups. Just
And
awful.
no one wants to put their hand up and say, I was the lawyer who gave the advice that this was okay.
Yeah, that's the thing.
No
That's
one's
missing.
going to put their hand up for that.
No one is going to put their, even though they might be called to question. Like the bureaucrats have just dissembled. Morrison, we just talked about here, the former foreign minister who was the head of the DHS. She was not a member of cabinet at the time. I'm just trying to think of her name. Large woman, red hair. And,
Maurice Payne.
Maurice Payne, thank you, yes. And Maurice Payne gave evidence there when she said, well, I don't know. So who provided that advice? I don't know. And that advice is that there was no legislative change required, which is where it all fell over. So one minute the DSS is saying you must change legislation, and Morrison read all those reports, as did Maurice Payne, who was a junior minister, and then the advice was that the advice excluded any recommendation or advice to make legislative change, and they just went ahead with it. Who made that change? I don't know.
No one seems to know. Even though she wasn't in cabinet, she would have been in the cabinet room when these things were discussed.
That's right. Yeah, that was actually made clear in the hearing that when they attended the expenditure review committee, which is senior cabinet members, that she was actually in the room when it was discussed.
Yeah, that's the way the cabinet works. If you're a junior minister and something affecting your portfolio is on the agenda, you sit out in the corridor and wait until your agenda item comes up, and you're in the cabinet room as well.
Yeah, and that was the case with the expenditure review committee as well. She basically waited outside and then she went in. It all just seems...
Anyway, Jack, we had this Royal Commission sorted out weeks and weeks ago. We said they're going to decide it was a lousy idea and badly implemented.
Pretty much that will be the report, Jack. Although it will run several volumes more than just that. But in the end, it'll be
they should have asked
no
us.
one
We
really.
That for them in a week.
Oh, mate! Look, there'll be a number of other ministers who'll go forward. I would think will give evidence before this Royal Commission wraps up. Stuart Robert will be one, and of course we've got the current education spokesperson for the coalition. What's his name, Jack? The one who actually got on radio and said, if you're guilty, come forward now, otherwise you'll go to jail. And the bloke who had all sorts of problems with his media advisor, Jack. He had a bit of an affair with her. I'm going to say Teague, but it's not Teague.
Barnaby Joyce.
No.
Yeah. Rochelle Miller's bloke.
Yeah, that's right. So he'll be up before it too. And crikey.
Alan
Tudge, not Teague. Alan Tudge. Good Lord. Sorry, listeners, that was terrible. And having a bit of a Christmas moment there. But yeah, he'll be before them too. And I would think the first question I'll be asking him is, where did you get that information that people will be going to jail? I mean, that just heightened the response. And seriously, why that guy's still in politics has got me beat. Meanwhile, Jack, on the other side of things, this is always enjoyable to watch. The Greens are having a blue. And it would seem that the Victoria...
Yet again.
the Victorians, you can't govern yourself. You don't be expected to run. You can't be expected to govern the country. That's the way I always look at the Greens. And this relates to, we'll get on to the topic in a moment, but there is some suggestion that the Victorian Greens will be expelled from the National Party, Jack. And just to explain to our listeners, the Greens are a state-based organisation. So you've got WA Greens, you've got Tasmanian Greens, New South Wales Greens, Victoria, etc. And the great body, that national body, really is in many ways subservient to the states. And generally speaking, the states tend to fight a fair bit between themselves. The New South Wales state Greens are a very different kettle of fish to the Tasmanians, for example, who are essentially green conservatives.
They're environmentalists.
They're environmentalists in the traditional sense, yeah. But this is over a failure, a perceived failure among the various state Greens parties of the Victorian branch to get its house in order over trans policy, Jack.
Well, it's part of the sort of worldwide battle, all around the Western world battle between the trans activists and the TERFs. And personally, I don't want to touch the argument at all. It's got barbed wire and razor ribbon and all sorts of stuff all over it. We're not going to go any of this. Yeah. We're not going to go any of that. I would just make this comment. The reason the Greens have these problems, in my view, is because they absorbed the worst of the Maoist and the socialist and the Soviet factions in the old left. Well, they all became part of the Greens,
in New South Wales,
taken their habits with them.
Yeah, in New South Wales, that is definitely the case. I mean, for a long-serving senator with the Greens was Lee Rhiannon, and her conservative credentials, would end at watering a pot plant, conservation credentials, I should say.
Well, she was part of the old Soviet faction.
Yeah, she was. Yeah, she used to bang out a Soviet newsletter that was funded by the Kremlin through the 60s and 70s.
I think she went to the Patrice Lumumba University for a while in Moscow.
She might have put in a year. She's definitely spent a fair bit of time in the Soviet Union. Her parents were old comms, weren't they? Browns.
Of course they were. They were all old comms. So it's because of the presence within various state branches of the party of both the old Soviet faction and the Maoist faction that they behave like the old Soviet and Maoist factions did in the Labor Party. So they lack transparency, they lack accountability, and they absolutely resent any public scrutiny.
Oh, that's right. That's the other thing. So when you have a Green State Council meeting, Jack, it's often held in a big hall. There might be a couple of hundred people there.
Yeah.
But no media, mate. No one's allowed inside. You've got to sit outside and wait, and they'll come up and they'll have, there might be blood and teeth and hair in the walls inside the building. They'll come out and say, well, we've just had a beautiful day, beautiful meeting, and everyone is full of harmony and peace and love.
Those of us who spent a lot of our youth in the Labor Party recognise this.
Well, at least you'd see the blood. That's the thing.
Yeah.
At least you'd see a bit of biffo going on. But the Greens don't like that scrutiny. Just on this particular topic, I just pulled this out. Prominent Greens members in the state branch, including Melbourne City Councillor Rowan Leppert and Linda Gale, have expressed worries about the party's policies. This is in this transgender issue. Gale has raised concerns about the policy implications for the rights of non-trans women in sport. It's a very hot topic. Intimate medical procedures, domestic violence shelters, hospital wards and prisons. Her election this year as Victorian Greens convener was overturned amid a social media-driven backlash. And that's all getting back to that transgender TERF sort of issue.
Yeah, and the consequences, of course, of the Victorian branch being expelled from the Greens would extend to the federal parliament, because that would put the Greens leader, Adam Bant, the member for Melbourne, in a difficult position, because it would appear from so far as we can glean what the Greens' rules are, because they're very obscure,
opaque, yes.
they're very opaque. That if the Victorian Greens are expelled, he can't be the national leader either.
He would have to be the leader of the Victorian Greens.
Yes,
That would be it. 2 members, I think, only the 2. Yes, so that would be very, very interesting. It is. It must be said. Some of the Greens are saying no, this has not been raised as an issue, the expulsion of the Victorian branch. But clearly, it's being talked about, Jack. Peace and goodwill to men has been suspended within the Greens for a week or so while they have a bloody Christmas.
yeah, indeed.
Always good fun to watch when the Greens are having a brawl. I feel a column coming on, Jack. I do enjoy them. Okay, now we're going overseas and to China and this continued problem with COVID lockdowns and extreme measures to reduce the flow of COVID into their big cities.
Well, it seems at the moment that they're moving to open up, and good news for Hong Kong. They're talking about perhaps as early as next month, perhaps even before Chinese New Year, which is early this year. It's in late January.
Normally around Australia Days, and it does vary. But yeah.
It's normally later than Australia Day, but it's actually on Australia Day this weekend, next year. There's talk about opening the border again, which would be great news for Hong Kong.
No date set yet?
No date, but there's certainly plenty of gossip about that. Hong Kong University scientists have predicted up to 1 million deaths as China opens up and removes the COVID restrictions. My guess is that's probably about right. If they, if China ended up with
big number, Jack, it's a bloody big number.
It's a big number, but it's a big country. There are 1.4 billion people over there.
I thought it was predicting deaths in Hong Kong alone.
No.
Across China.
In China.
Okay.
And look, if they had the death rate, say, of the US or the UK, there would be a number much higher than that, be 2 or 3 plus. If they had the same as, say, Japan or Korea, there would be 500,000 deaths. And that there will be deaths is certain, because all of the lockdowns do, wherever they've been done, is kind of kick the problem down the road.
Yes, we've still got major issues with COVID in this country, particularly around aged care facilities, but there are a lot of people in hospital. But we do have a stock, and certainly we well and truly put lockdowns and so forth behind us, but we have access to antivirals, right? And access to 3rd and 4th COVID boosters, and then again there are other drugs that are coming onto the market now that will require a sort of one jab only approach, and I understand. Look, our 4th COVID booster numbers are terrible. In Australia, I don't know what they're like in China.
Yes. And of course, they're not using the mRNA vaccine.
Right, that's the Sinovac.
The Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccines. So, look, the numbers the numbers look very frightening, but it is a very big country.
The pressure must be forming on the Politburo and on the president that they can't get their economy rolling while these lockdowns and hard measures are still in place. That must be occurring. These are some of the smartest public administrators in the world. That must have dawned on them that they need to move on.
And they seem to be doing that.
Okay. A lovely story from the European Union, Jack. A little bit of money passing hands.
I've seen the photos. You've seen the photos? They've actually got photos of the suitcases.
Got a suitcase. Brown paper bag's not big enough.
Yeah.
Yes, I have seen that. And look, you might just want to tell us what it's all about. It involves the World Cup host, Qatar, offering money to EU MEPs.
Yes.
And that is to basically go slow on criticism of Qatar's basically industrial affairs sort of policies.
Indeed.
And it involves a number of NGOs, and we'll get to one of them in a moment, which is quite sinister. But yeah, that's basically it, isn't it? Money for good PR.
Basically, that's right. And for assistance in opening doors within Brussels, within the European Parliament, and within the EU itself. Nothing clever about it. It's right back to the old-fashioned days of a suitcase full of cash.
Yeah, and Eva Kaili is the sort of whistleblower. She was a vice president of the European Parliament and a member from Greece. And she's come out and spoken about this, and it would seem that the focus of the investigation now is drawing on left-wing members of the European Parliament.
It seems to be, although that's a little bit unclear, and the factions are within the European Parliament are a little bit hard to read.
Yeah.
Eva Carli's husband, I think his name's Francesco Giorgi,
yes,
who's an Italian, and he actually works for an Italian member of the European Parliament, plus runs his own little sideline in an NGO. He has reportedly confessed to. I suppose if they find the suitcase under your bed, it's probably about time to start confessing.
Yeah. Well, and what is that suitcase doing? And it is a push, as I say, for a lot of the NGOs to go very quietly on. And one of those NGOs, Jack, is the International Trade Union Confederation.
Yes.
And while there has been a great deal of talk, we'll talk about the World Cup shortly. But one of the big issues around the World Cup was the treatment of foreign workers in Qatar to help build the stadia and hotels and all these other infrastructure constructions that needed to be done. And there's been a great deal of criticism from various Labor LABOUR groups around the world, but it would seem the International Trade Union Confederation is not one of them, Jack, who continue to go on about how Qatar's taken great steps towards providing a better workplace.
Our very own Sharon Burrows, who used to be at the ACTU.
President of the ACTU many years ago.
There was a lovely little interview clip in her new role as head of the ICT?
ITUC.
ITCU, and she was very much, telling us that we're being a bit hard on Qatar.
Yeah, that's what it was. And they've done these. Look, this was part of the Qatari propaganda that one of the things that they had changed about the way in which foreign workers were employed in Qatar was that in their bad days that an employee would need the permission of the employer in order to leave the country.
Yes.
It's led to a lot of rip-offs and so forth. Then they proudly claimed that they changed this, and they have, except to say the practice is still in place. So there's, it's law, the legal enshrinement is gone, but in terms of all practicalities, anyone who works for a construction company in Qatar still requires the permission of their employer before they can move on, and it involves a lot of rip-offs. So when Sharon Burrows, former president of the ACTU, addressed this in a video, she was making a big claim about how this was a huge reform, and really it hasn't been much of a reform at all. I guess there are two ways of looking at basically the Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Qatar, etc., is that, and this is sort of the British mode, Jack, that any sort of little incremental change is a good thing. And maybe that's true to a point. I mean, you're never going to get an overwhelming reform of Saudi Arabia, for example, where they stop executing people on the streets and allow women to drive cars, which they currently do. This is just basically one of those little incremental changes. But in practical terms, it doesn't really work out that way. So it's really quite interesting to look at Sharon Burrows, who is Labor with a U to the bootstraps, congratulating the Qataris for some of their reforms.
Yeah, difficult position to be in. In all fairness, you go over there, you do some work, you have some kind of success. You kind of want to tout that success, don't you?
Yeah, and that's what it is. I'm not suggesting anything more of Ms. Barrows, but the ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation, unlike the ILO, the International Labour Organisation, have been ramping up Qatar's credentials, human rights and industrial relations credentials, while the ILO has not been. We've been very, very critical. That's the difference.
Yep.
Ukraine, Russia, Jack, never far away from our minds. Did you see the interview with Igor Girkin?
No, I didn't, but I've read your notes on it.
Yes, well, I mean, Gherkin is, for anyone who hasn't seen or heard of him, he is a former member of the GSB, that's the KGB, current
Successor.
The current body, an ultra-nationalist, Minister of Defence in the Donetsk People's Republic, which is a puppet state of Russia, and he was interviewed saying that it was all a terrible mistake. He doesn't want to hang. He doesn't want to go to The Hague. He doesn't want to hang in Kiev, where he has been basically sentenced in absentia. And he's just gone on to slam the Russian military and the Kremlin, and saying that Russia will be defeated. And the people who are in charge of the war have made a very grievous mistake and continue to lie to the Russian people.
Indeed.
Just to get an idea of this, it's very difficult. There's a piece in the New York Times today where you've got sort of data journalists who are looking at just how badly this war has gone for Russia. Because the official figures from the Kremlin are that the Russians have lost just 3,000 odd soldiers since the invasion in February last week. Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he said a month ago that Moscow's casualties were 100,000 Russian soldiers killed and wounded, a little bit more than the 3,500. And you've got data people sifting through the internet to basically try and get a better idea of it, because the Kremlin is clearly not being very honest about this. And while all this is going, there's talk of the Russians doubling down on their offensive. My question, Jack, is how are they going to be able to do that with a Russian military? Yes, they can fire off missiles, and yes, they can try and take down infrastructure, particularly around electricity generation, and make life as uncomfortable as they possibly can for the Ukrainians. But in terms of troop movements, I don't know that they have the numbers on the ground to do it anymore.
Perhaps not. The last I saw of the up-to-date maps, which are of the front, which are produced variously by the French and by the Brits, etc., It all looks like a bit of a stalemate at the moment. There's not much movement at all, really, one way or the other.
There certainly won't be a whole lot of fighting over this period, over the next month or so, just because of the winter. I mean, it's just going to be too damn cold. But at the same time, I don't know that basically the first wave of Russian soldiers that went into the country include some of their special forces, include highly trained professional soldiers. Now it looks like it's going to be Dad's army. People getting press ganged into service. I cannot see how they can be. I mean, can we speculate on Jack? Can we speculate how devastating would it be for the Russians to be kicked back beyond their February invasion border? How devastating would it be for the Kremlin?
From where they are today, because they've already suffered an abject defeat in terms of their war aims. they've failed to materialise. And they've become a bit of an international pariah. So
Yeah. I mean,
it's a catastrophe for Russia.
It's a catastrophe, and what I'm saying is that at least with Putin was still in charge, and I am speculating here, but there is going to be some profound impact on the decision makers in Russia over this ultimately. And what I'm suggesting is that if Russia is a pariah state, Putin gets ousted one way or another. I mean, it may well be that the world has to deal with a chaotic Russia. With
That's certainly a possibility. Yes.
Yeah, and with
for the second time in our lifetime,
and with I think the world's second largest number of nuclear weapons. So it's it's one of those devil you don't know sort of arguments where this is all going to land. All I'd say, speculation aside, all I'd say is that we were talking and we were doing podcasts, you and I, about this when the Russians invaded in February, and we weren't alone. It was certainly the world view that this was going to be over in months, if not weeks. And it's quite extraordinary. I think it's the story of the year, really, that it just hasn't panned out that way at all. And that after early gains, the Russians have been pushed back, and now they are looking at a humiliating defeat.
Yes. Well, I think they've already suffered a humiliating defeat.
Yeah. It's how the politics of that play out. It's going to be really, really interesting over in 2023 and beyond. In the United States,
even if they can hold on to what they've got now, that's still a humiliating defeat.
Well, they're going to want it. They're going to want the Donbass, and they're just not going to get it. I mean, they're just not in a position to negotiate. They're not in a position of any strength.
No.
All right, United States Jack. Now you would have shelled out the $99 for an NFT of the Donald Trump in various superhero modes. You would, and apparently they're worth about $80 today. So they're not not going all that well.
It's hard to know. That might be a factor of the whole NFT thing's collapsing. I saw a piece in the paper that said that they were. A year ago, they stood at $23 billion, and they're worth about $2.4 billion. The whole world market in NFTs.
Again, Jack. If people had bothered listening to us at the time, and we would have said, "Do not buy this junk."
Yeah. But I did enjoy the Trump announcement. I particularly liked him tearing open the front of the shirt and exposing the Superman chest with the laser eyes.
With huge hands. He's got huge hands in these NFTs too, Jack.
Yeah.
As opposed to the little tiny ones he actually gets around with. But it's further evidence, isn't it, of a mental disintegration with that man.
It's further evidence that he's on the way out.
Yeah, you sent me a few things there, some early polling figures and what have you, showing that Republicans are shifting fairly dramatically towards the Florida Governor DeSantis and away from Trump. And really, it comes on the back of independent voters who make up a third of the vote in the United States, really dropping off him. So there's really no way that this guy proceeds, and all this sort of stuff has just got to be, he needs money. He's got a whole. Well, I see the Democrat Congressman Schiff, Adam Schiff, has said that he's seen enough evidence to believe that Trump should be charged with criminal offences in regard to the January 6th uprising. But
Adam Schiff's not a reliable correspondent.
I wouldn't have thought so, but and look, it did run very hard in the Guardian today, and it didn't rate a mention in the New York Times. Yeah. But
Twitter's been very good about the whole NFT thing. The two bits that I really liked was a comment. I don't know if I prefer this. This is the NFT launch to massively fail, or for the cultists to invest their entire 401ks. That's their superannuation.
That's their super,
in Trump's superhero NFTs and go bust. I also like there's a great meme going around on Twitter, which was two photos side by side One was the Trump Superman NFT, my personal favourite, the one I would give my $99 for.
Yeah.
And it was right next to Fonzie in his beloved leather jacket on the water skis about to jump the shark.
Well, look, it's just really, really bizarre. And I was having a look at one of the cryptocurrencies, Jack, that's also just in free fall. It's not Bitcoin. It's one of those just absolutely gone nowhere. And a lot of people from the, shall we say, the Cooker community have invested heavily in this stuff, really being pulled around by the nose by influencers and what have you to get into NFTs, but also crypto, and they're just getting belted at the moment.
Well, it's the fools from the left and the right who've got into the crypto.
Well, it's one of those things, Jack. It's one of those things that cautious police officers from fraud squads tell us. You know, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where we are with NFTs and all this kind of nonsense that was never going to fly. Meanwhile, Jack, the Wall Street Journal's got a poll on the Biden administration. Well, just on the economy and confidence in it. 65% of respondents said the economy is headed in the wrong direction, while 52% it will get worse. 52% said it will get worse in 2023. 67% of those polled, meanwhile, rated the strength of the economy negatively, compared with 32% who rated it positively. So there's an air of doom and gloom around the United States in economic terms, Jack.
There is. Same in the UK.
Same here.
Andrew Neil wrote a very positive column in the Daily Mail at the weekend saying he thought that 2023 would be better than it currently looks like being. But the UK bears all the hallmarks of going back to the winter of discontent. You know, the weather's bad, there are endless strikes, cost of living's going up too fast. It all looks pretty gloomy.
Cost of living and all such things are variable, but winter's not, Jack. Well,
it's a particularly cold winter, which makes the morale a little bit lower, I think, is the answer.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's it. I mean, look, the US cost of living fact that the cost of living indicator is basically showing inflation in the most recent quarter assessed going down. Petrol prices aren't anywhere near what they were post-Russian invasion. So they're probably, I understand if people looking at long, hard winters, perhaps in the Midwest or on the East Coast, might be saying, well, this looks awful. But the economic figures aren't that bad.
No, they're not great, but they're not that bad either.
Yeah, well, they seem to be going in the right direction, if slowly, Jack. Now, if you ever wanted to feel better about ourselves, there's only one way to do that, I think, Jack, or the best way to do that is to look to get your Netflix app open and start having a look at the Harry and Meghan stuff, Jack, because isn't there just there's nothing more enlightening to look at, in my view, than watching rich, privileged people complain about their terrible lives.
As a mate said to me the other day, every silver lining has a cloud.
So we get Harry and Meghan, and it just seems to be just full of gripes, most of which don't exist. They've had to use footage, basically a file footage, because they couldn't make the footage that they're talking about work for them in terms of complaints and so forth.
They are the most relentlessly miserable duo you'd ever see. It must be an exhausting way to live, to be sort of forced yourself.
There cannot be a moment of fun there, Jack.
No.
Because you're constantly saying, look, we've been just treated terribly.
My favourite moment watching a bit of the show was when Harry was talking about what a success the wedding was, and all of a sudden his face started to light up, and how great it was with big crowds,
Happy
all that
memories.
sort of stuff. And Megan got him straight back on the straight and narrow by telling him, well, it was worse when I was pregnant.
Oh yes, because and that was. They're essentially claiming that Buckingham Palace got the colour chart out, Jack, when she got the Dulux colour chart and were finding their way through the fawn and brown areas to try and figure out what colour the child would be. I mean, it's just awful.
Everybody, I've got a biracial son, and anybody I know who's got biracial kids, of course you have some curiosity as to whether your son's going to look more Chinese or more European, and indeed what happens as they grow up, they veer from one to the other. There are times when they look Chinese and there are times where they look European, and this is just natural curiosity.
Yeah, but I mean, in Buckingham Palace terms, Jack, for Harry and Meghan, it is sign of systemic racism.
Yes, I know.
Look, I'd love to see some figures. You got any available? How many people are downloading this stuff?
The figures are pretty good for a show that hasn't got much substance. So they've got a lot of viewers.
Well, I can't say. Besides having to pay those two. Quite a large amount of money. I think it was 10 million, wasn't it? 10 million US. Besides having to pay them, there's very little in terms of the production budget there.
Yeah.
They had to pull out a bit of file footage for various things there. They had to buy that, and then basically just setting up the cameras at wherever they live now. I think they're living
Montecito.
Yeah, that's right. In Montecito, they bought the new place. They were able to live in someone else's mansion for a while there. But
rent free. You have to go back.
Nice work if you can get it, Jack.
You go back and look at what happened to the Duke and Duchess of Windsor after the abdication, and they were kind of celebrity superstars, although they weren't called that in those days, for a little while after the abdication. But it all faded eventually. Because with the
Nazism and all.
Yeah, well, that's true. And all Harry did was wear a swastika to a fancy dress party.
Yeah, that was just made up. But Edward, I think Edward VIII,
he might have
had the gear in the cupboard. Yeah,
he might have been the real deal. But once you get over that first sugary hit from, well, isn't it terrible that you've been forced out, etc., there's nothing there. There's no business model left.
Well, they weren't forced out. They left.
Yes.
These are people who seem incapable of understanding consequence, Jack.
Yes.
You walk out of and they're still on. Is he still on a quid, or has that been from the Windsors?
I don't know.
And he's got significant property holdings and all those sorts of things anyway. Yeah. Look,
and he inherited 40 million from his mum, so he's not badly off.
When you look around the world, it's perhaps time for us to stop feeling sorry for them, Jack.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it may be time for them to stop feeling sorry for themselves.
It's just a bit. It's just a bit much. Haven't watched the show. It's on Netflix. If you're that keen, listeners, check it out. But you will. I'm tipping that you will leave or finish watching that episode feeling vaguely unsatisfied. The Thursday that's been called. It's actually been called the Thursday Night Massacre, Jack. Twitter. When Elon, who is fast becoming a drooling paranoid, punted, how many journalists? 5 or 6? Might have been more.
Yeah. I just love the fact they called it a massacre.
It's a Thursday Night Massacre. It's actually got a Wikipedia entry, Jack, already.
Yeah, it has, yeah.
So it was, look, there are various sites on Twitter and around on social media, Facebook, Instagram and so forth, that monitor private jet flights. and you can actually, it's quite amusing. I've looked at them myself. You find some of these rappers and so forth going, they'll fly from San Francisco to LA, or they might even fly 10 minutes in the air, and these sites will calculate how much they've cost, how much fuel they've burnt, and all that sort of stuff.
Or Leo DiCaprio flying halfway around the world to a climate change conference,
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. So this stuff's been around for a while. And some of the journalists who were banned, not all of them, it must be said, were actually linking messages on Twitter that would link to Elon's use of private jets, and he reckons that's doxing. He went on to say that his son was stalked by someone in LA to the point where the stalker has leapt on the bonnet and so forth, and the LAPD came forward and said, we don't have any reports on that at the moment.
You've got to give our listeners the name of the son.
Well, he called him X2, I think, on Twitter.
Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
And I just wonder, Jack, has he gone off the edge? I think the thing, just before you answer that, I think the thing that might have got him was the hashtag Space Karen, which I just loved. He is Space Karen. Has he lost the plot, Jack?
I don't know. It'll all come out in the wash in the end.
Yeah, I think the people who sort of look, it's not a good thing to be suspending journalists for no good reason. But he claimed it was doxing. I don't know. I think
they're almost all back on now anyway. So
there's a couple who have Olbermann, Keith Olbermann, who's the NSBC panel show host, or not panel show, but show host. Yeah, he was a Twitter user. He's not back on. He
was an MSNBC panel host. He got sort of the flick from MSNBC for being a raving nutter.
He's not on air anymore.
No, because he's a raving nutter, which means to me that you should leave him on Twitter, because Keith Olbermann's Twitter feed was often worth a look. If he wanted the craziest possible take on a current news story, he could give it to you.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on Elon. It's a difficult time for a lot of people over Christmas, and he might be feeling a bit sad and lonely, but yeah, Space Karen, that's got to hurt. Meanwhile, Jack, in the United Nations, representing us all, it's actually a good news story, this one. The Islamic Republic of Iran was just expelled from the UN Women's Rights Commission, votes 29-8 with 16 abstentions. Hats off to the UN.
Yeah. It's interesting that who voted against: Bangladesh, Belize, Botswana, Congo. They abstained. The ones who voted against the expulsion were Bolivia, China, Zimbabwe, Russians, Oman, Nigeria, Nicaragua, and Kazakhstan.
Some of the world's, shall we say, some of the harsher regimes around the world there. Nicaragua was all over the place. Nigeria too. Oman, yes.
But even some people who would naturally be a little bit sort of favourably inclined to the Iranians just abstained.
Yes, Australia not in that vote, of course, because we are not on the UN Women's Rights Commission. But those countries that were, Afghanistan, we haven't got a vote for them. But I'm not quite sure what happened there. But common sense prevailed. That's what we can say there. So well done, and a rare piece of praise for the United Nations. Jack,
certainly is rare for me.
World Cup, absolutely stunning final. If I'm a little shabby today and my mind's not exactly like a well-oiled machine, it's because I waited up and watched a magnificent final, one of the greatest sporting competitions I've seen
It's a great success, wasn't it? The World Cup. The whole thing was a success. Was a huge success.
Well, yes and no, but certainly the final and the outcome has.
I thought the group stages were excellent as well.
Oh, the soccer. I've got no complaints whatsoever about the game. You know, as I say, FIFA call it soccer, but that's my little joke. The final was astonishing. Messi scored twice. Played a role in another goal, so he kicked the 3 Argentinian goals, and the French star Mbappe kicked the hat trick. So at the end of extra time, 3-3, then they go into a penalty shootout. It gets very, very tough at that stage, and Argentina won 4-2 in the penalty kick out, in the penalty shootout. And it means it's just confirmed Lionel Messi as the greatest player, certainly of his generation, if not of all time.
Yeah, I'm always a bit.
Well, it's a fairy tale.
About,
it's an absolute fairy tale ending to a career, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm always a bit dubious about people saying that someone's the greatest of all time. He's the best of the current lot, is how I would put it.
Our best footballer of a generation has been around for a very, very long time. Yes, and look, I'm not going to say congratulations to the host nation. The soccer was sensational. The football itself was sensational, as you say. The qualifying rounds provided us plenty. You had really two countries that weren't considered to go deep into the comp, playing off for third and fourth, Serbia and
well, that's Morocco. A bit hard on Croatia. They made the final last time, so.
Well, yeah. Look, I mean, it probably is unsimple, but no one had them, getting in there ahead of Brazil. No one had them getting in there across Germany. We did have a couple of shambles or disgraces along the way, including Germany.
Yeah, and to be fair, the Croatian, their talisman player, the great Luka Modric, was another 4 years older, and and looking to be past his best, really. But he was terrific in the tournament, And great in the 3v4 playoff.
They had a very good tournament, and I guess the Qataris, their own team, didn't do all that well. Look, we've got to sort of the counterpoint to what happened in the World Cup, the fairy tale for Lionel Messi, an unlucky France, just falling short, all that sort of stuff. The counterpoint to all of this is what took place in Melbourne on Saturday night, with a crowd invasion of the pitch, a goalkeeper injured, someone throwing a bucket full of sand, causing an immediate laceration, quite serious laceration to his face, a concussion. The referee was also jostled, and a Channel 10 cameraman was also injured. Jack, it just takes you back to the bad old days of soccer in Australia, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think I said a week or two ago, an English friend was talking up the Australians' prospects of getting out of the group. He says, look, they're Aussies. They'll be well-drilled, well-organised, they'll be hard fit, and they'll give it a real crack. And that's true. That was true of our national team, but is not true of the game in Australia. None of those things are true. It's not well-drilled, it's not well-organised, and it's not hard.
Yeah, protesters from Melbourne Victory were inspired by the decision made by Football Australia to play the next three grand finals in Sydney, and they said to be most upset. So they were riled about that, hurling flares. What is it with bloody soccer spectators and flares, Jack? What is going on there?
It's time to get into the straight leg pants, really, isn't it?
Very, very funny, mate. Yes, very good. But yeah, earlier, that's how it started. And I noticed the managing director of Melbourne Victory was saying, "Oh yes, perhaps if the goalkeeper didn't throw that flare back into the crowd, there wouldn't have been the pitch invasion." And you go, "Yeah, really not seeing that as the as where the problem lies." Well, I reckon I'll make it nice and loud, and any Melbourne Victory player, supporter, and probably be quite a few lunatics among them, I can't see any reason why that team should be in the competition.
No, I do
They
the
should
same
be
thing.
expelled. They should be expelled from the competition.
Yep.
What are the other?
Shut it down.
What are the things available to Football Association to Football Australia, I should say? That would be, they can play with their crowds. They lose points in the competition. I can't see. I think basically, as you say, shut it down, shut the club down, and let that be. Put everyone on notice. This is what will happen.
Well, you turned out for a fair few years in the old Victorian Amateur Football Association,
Mate,
and they used to have a
straight out of the comp. If anything like that happened, where a referee or an umpire was threatened, straight out of the comp.
Because they had a few clubs who caused a few problems like that.
We did have a few blokes from some of those clubs when the clubs disintegrated came and played with us, Jack. It was a very colourful experience.
But yeah, that's what you got to do.
That's I think there's no other way forward.
Offer the franchise to somebody else, get some money for it.
Yeah. Can't see any problem with that whatsoever. And of course, that goes in hand with the police investigation that must charge those responsible for the pitch invasion and for the assaults and quite serious assaults that occurred afterwards. Jack, I watched this with real joy on Friday night. This was the Sydney Thunder, all out for 15.
Yeah,
in a big bash game against the Adelaide Strikers.
I was in the pub and I had one more beer just to see how they go. And before I finished my beer, it was all over.
It was
10 for 15.
10 for 15 off, I think 35 balls. It was 5.5 overs.
One beer.
So terrible strike rate for a start. Terrible. And I think the bowler Hoggett, who came in at 10, he top scored with 4. The bowlers, I think Wes Agar got 4 for 6 and Thornton got 5 for 3. It's just an astonishing rate. They batted last night, the Thunder, and got 160 odd. But this reminded me, I've seen quite a few scorebooks from the under 12s, under 14s, under 16s in my
It did
time.
look a lot like that, didn't it?
It did look. I mean, if I saw it at the under 12s, I'd pull the coach aside and say, "What's going on there? What do we need? What do we need to do?"
Yeah. I thought the coach was pretty good. What he said was, "Thank God we've got a fast turnaround. You wouldn't want to sit around and think about this for too long."
You wouldn't want to
either,
would you?
You're going bad when I can't even finish a small bottle of James Bogues while your whole innings goes under.
It was the most amazing scorecard you'll ever see for professional cricketers. That's when you have to make the distinction there. It's not the under 12s at Manangatang. This is professional cricketers blasted out for 15. And, of course, that leads us to the 2-day test at the Gabba, Jack, all over.
Did you see the pitch before the start of play? It was one of those ones where you walked across the ground, you couldn't work out where the pitch was,
That's what Matty Hayden said. It just looked like they'd made a strip of the outfield.
Yeah.
And it was taking dings and so forth. Now, Peter Lawler came on to the Channel 7 commentary late in the day yesterday with this kind of report that he believed the ICC will rate this wicket as poor, and there are a number of triggers for that. I think if you get is it 3?
Poor? It wasn't that good. It was worse than poor.
Well, that's their rating system. So one of those criteria is. Criterion is that basically was there excessive seam, and it would sort of tick that box. So it'd be rated as poor, and how that works is that if you get 3 pours in 5 years, basically you lose the test. The Gabba would not be able to host that. It had a pour 4 years ago, so there's a bit of an issue there. The
weather in Brisbane can be a little bit variable over
this time of year.
That's true.
Yeah,
but that's a poor performance. It really was.
It wasn't great, and I also what caught my ears was Justin Langer also saying that when the Australian cricket side come to the Gabba to play, they basically have to train. It's considered almost contrary to the normal conditions around Australia. So that was a big thing. Fantastic catching too. Steve Smith.
Oh, the big fella in the gully is an absolute gem.
He's got the big hands, mate. He's a large unit. Travis Head, the 92. That's as good as 150 elsewhere. He's really started to fit into that side. He's been doing this now for 2 test seasons, coming in and playing that aggressive role at number 5. And what about our little mate Davey? He needs some runs in Melbourne, doesn't he?
The end's coming quickly, isn't it?
It's just those hands and it can just creep up in you. The hands, the eyes, they just don't work quite as fast.
And the feet.
And they're playing a very good attack. Grabata, he took the wickets. Nortje is very fast, consistently fast. I'd like to see him in the field all day and see how long he's able to keep those paces up. But it's a very good pace attack that they're facing. The batting South African batting is very brittle. But we hope we'll get a better wicket in Melbourne. We can both have a good look. We can all see just how well the Australian side is going, leading in the rankings at the moment. So there we are, Jack. A full weekend of sport, including a bloody near riot at what do they call it? The Melbourne, the Melbourne,
the rectangular stadium. I forget who's sponsoring it now.
That sort of weird-looking thing out near the tennis centre. So we had a full range of sport, Jack, and you've got something to take us out.
2 things. We said what would happen. People were asking what would happen to Boris Johnson after he ceased to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
I was predicting more holidays in Antigua.
Yeah. They say the reports he's earned £1 million in speeches since in the short time since he ceased to be Prime Minister. And this is what we thought would happen. Remember we looked at what people were paying to listen to Theresa May and people like that speak. And she would send anybody to sleep. And Boris is at least funny.
Yeah. No, he's a good public speaker. It's perhaps, it must be a little daunting for Scott Morrison too, because, I don't think there'll be too many people paying him large amounts of money to speak.
He won't be earning £1 million in the first 6 months of next year.
And also,
the other thing I saw is a lovely old story from an American journalist. He was driving his car one day and he picked up a hitchhiker, and the hitchhiker said, he asked if I wasn't worried that he might be a serial killer. And the journalist says, well, nah. I mean, what are the chances of there being 2 serial killers in the same car at the same time?
There you go. That is an oldie but a goodie, Jack. Let me tell you, that is a true crime evergreen, that one. Yes. So it may not be, maybe your journalist, or the journalist you're referring to might have just made that one up. But
quite possibly, but it's a great story.
It's not bad. It's not bad. But look, nothing's going to get any better than Kamala, because she's on fire.
Oh, I've lost my
Kamala. Let me help you out.
Hang on. I've got it here. Here it is. This is Kamala giving a public speech.
I just want to do a sort of drum roll here on the quote. This is Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States.
We have the ability to see what can be, unburdened by what has been, and then to make the possible actually happen.
What's that? What are we talking? 40 words without a semblance of meaning.
And all I can say is, if she doesn't get a spot on the ticket for the next election in 2024, she's not the presidential candidate or the vice presidential candidate, there's a future for her at Hallmark cards.
There is too. That's the kind of mindless rubbish you do get on greeting cards. Yes, well done, Jack. Well said. And that's a wrap for us, and indeed a wrap for us as we record on the 19th of December, a wrap for us for the year. We're going to take a week off next week, and we will be back on the airwaves probably second week of January. I don't know, it might even be the first one, Jack. So we'd like to thank our listeners for hanging with us. We've changed the formats a bit throughout the year. We've gone to a combination overseas and domestic news, and we hope you continue to enjoy the program. Look forward to all your feedback. You know how to get hold of me on Twitter, DMs, or through the Conditional Release Program at gmail.com. And Jack, I'd like to wish you a very happy Christmas over the next week or so, and the same to our listeners. I hope you'll all be up and having ripping the top off your first stubby at around about 10:30 for on the Boxing Day for the cricket.
Yeah, well, I'll be spending a fair bit of time watching the Boxing Day test, and I hope all our listeners are as well. Happy Christmas to everybody.
Good on you. Thanks. See you, mate. And see you, listeners. Have a great and safe time over the Christmas period.